Good evening. Um, my name is Oliver, and I'm a full stack software architect at eXXcellent Solutions in Germany. And this is my first time at UI5 Con, and I'm really excited to be here. And also listening to the keynote now makes sense for me why this track here was giving me space for some interesting information, maybe that is connecting some parts, but you will see later. We at eXXcellent have a long history actually in Java solutions, and the SAP technology actually arose through HANA and UI5 some years ago. And I'm somehow myself went through the JavaScript part and the SPA, so single page applications, via UI5 on this kind of ecosystem. And well, yes, so total newcomer. And but we are trying to catch up, and we are trying also to bring in our ideas from other technology stacks. And this is actually this is what the talk is about. It's about story that I want to share. It's a true story, and this true story begins around now 10 years ago. And in the next 30 minutes or 40 minutes, I will try to depict this story from an education service. So it's a client that is giving remote distance learning opportunities for everybody, especially in the field of companies. And well, 10 years ago, they tried, or 2010, they had a solution that, of course, was old enough to get retired, and they started to think about something new. And this was the part where I also was participating, but only in a minor role as a developer. As a young developer, I also saw that it was very easy to somehow bring the customer to this kind of integrated system he liked. It was a time around when there were a lot of products on the market, like Liferay and so on, portal solutions that were hoping you bring in some content, and almost everything else is from the stack, from this product. And once you're logged in, then you may be happy. And this decision, went up to a big solution. And this big solution was this kind of, how to say, monolith or whatever. It was a kind of what we saw around 2012. And when my company not took over, but we actually analyzed this thing, and it had a lot of problems with costs, of course, and due to licensing. It has a vendor lock, and it has also maintaining problems, because to change something in block C, you have to go through A and B, and you have to make sure that you don't destroy something or just put the switches on the right part. So we decided for them it may be better solution for them just to have different parts of application. And as I said, it is in a remote distance learning platform that they wanted, a kind of campus that is like the real campus, like Facebook, of course, and like Xing and whatever. And so they had a client only for the student, and a client only for the employees to check up some grades and so on. And later on, after some years, they decided they also need a special client for the lecturer. And this kind of lecturer client was something completely new. It was not something administrative. It was also not this kind of shiny front end for the student. It was something in between. And due to limited budget, we of course thought about what to do. How can we solve this? And we had already chosen Angular as a platform for the student, and UI5, due to its good reputation for administrative user interfaces, and came up with something that was our shell. This kind of shell was not something new. It is actually kind of Launchpad. The Fiori Launchpad just is kind of inspiration for us. We created 3 reincarnations of this kind of Launchpad because it's not open source. So, and this solution is based on a Java backend. So it's really freestyle in all way. This is really a mix up of a lot of stuff. And we're happy that UI5 joined the open source foundation so that we could use it also in this project. And this is how it should look like. So this was also, so let's say this, we will see this will work. So this is the kind of campus that should be look like Facebook a little bit. So there's a usual, this kind of menu, there's this kind of parts that are changing. And we wanted that this kind of parts to the right shall be this UI5 apps, while we want to preserve this kind of shell surrounding it. And it has a lot of functionality like searches and chats and so on. And if you click some user names, it should open the chat from inside the UI5 app. So to do this, we tried to, different parts. And I want to show you now what was our journey from this. So in the technology point of view, we actually want to join several single page applications in one big application. And we don't want, and we cannot just create everything from scratch. So we don't want to use web components to do everything together how we can do it today, but actually we want to create something from what we have. So the idea was, and the promise is, of course, for this seamless integrated web application. Everybody has its, so every application has its own life cycle, because we don't want to maintain them all in the same way. Some kind of micro frontend, how it's called, or micro app. And we wanted to use different frameworks for their purposes and in their parts. And what was the part for choosing Angular and UI5 in any way? So we talked about it in a meetup some time ago. It was quite interesting to see the people from different worlds colliding, obviously. So our experience, this is just our experience. We see UI5 as really good one-stop solutions with all this control. I mean, they have massive controls and they all follow Fiori, these guidelines. And for us, it's really easy with a customer to speak through these guidelines, because the specification really very light. They are so light that actually they only talk about, I want to see those data and make them sortable as usual, and well, do whatever you need to do. That's it. On the Angular part, it's totally the opposite. Every little pixel is described, and there's a lot of effort in creating this style and match the idea that the customer has, because it's really the front end and the brand that is here sold to the customers. And we also saw that in the Angular part, there's often a kind of knowledge overload. So we have really not that much people that are able to handle both, but because you need a lot of advanced stuff in the Angular world, and you see a lot of stuff. And on the other hand, we have this kind of UI5 that is giving people an easy entrance to this kind of web world. Even app developer that we saw in the past that have that did a really good job. I mean, this is all, of course, in this kind of guidelines. And that's why we choose them next to each other. We see the differences, but we also see they have advantages. So why not combine them in one single client? And this kind of single client, will be, well, it will be some kind of technical part that needs to be done here. I will describe it with not that much code. So there's a kind of visual integration that we need. So we need to combine it in a way that it's not like an iframe, so really integrated deeply. And we tried with iframes, but it looked horrible, of course, in kind of responsiveness and styles and so on. It doesn't match really what you would get. And also the usual hyperlink version, just a link to an application and maybe opening another tab or window, is not what you want today. You want really something that is really integrated. And on the other hand, we have something like this interaction integration. This kind of interaction integration is something I would call you want to click somewhere in the application that is, let's say, the client, and it should trigger something in the hosting client. So as I told you in the beginning, something like clicking a name and chatting with somebody, but the chat is somewhere outside in the shell. And this shall be done through different technologies. So this is a UI5 app in the very target picture, this green part in the bottom, and the outer part, the shell, will be an Angular app. So how did we do it? So this is now the interesting part. Some basics. Usually we all want just is kind of scripting tags. Usually it's in the index somewhere, and we load this core application and all the moving parts that this application. Then we usually have something like an HTML tag that we have to place somewhere, and we need an kind of event that we use for the interaction part. So like an event hook or something like this. This is usually called the bootstrapping, and UI5 has something that is interesting for this, but we will start with the opposite. We will start with how about putting Angular in UI5. Putting Angular in UI5 is not that difficult. So this is also our first draft. So we are putting now something like an Angular component. In Angular, everything is a component. And everything like a component can also be instantiated, like you see here, in a controller. So this is really the same as before. It could be in an index HTML. So this is like the scripting tags, and then you put this child appending on it, and then you have this kind of core HTML Angular div that you want to become this Angular component. And this is the app root, and that's it. Actually, this would now render up to something like an application inside another application. And to make it more communicating to each other, because this could be also done by an iframe, we wanted something that is more using this kind of event bus. We have this in UI5, and of course, Angular also speaks about events all the time. Every component has only incoming and outgoing events for communicating, and this is a perfect match for us here to join those together. So I will just not show any demo because it doesn't look so big and bloating. But I will tell you it worked fine. And you can see also I have some links at the end where you can download and follow up this kind of integration. This works fine, but we don't see really a point in this because in UI5 we have enough of this kind of controls and components. We don't see really why you should use probably an Angular component. Maybe if you have an Launchpad that needs to integrate some kind of Angular component, but then you have to struggle with the Launchpad as a product, and so you have to actually do it yourself, the whole Launchpad. Actually, we did it, but it's not really what you want, not what we wanted. We want the opposite. We want UI5 to be used in Angular. Why should we have this in comparison to the other? Because Angular allows us to really, create this kind of huge, easy way of perfectly styled applications, and UI5 brings this kind of grids that we want, and all this mind-blowing filters, grouping, and sorting that we are actually interested in. And if we combine it in this way, it can create an application that is actually giving us some cost effectiveness, because then we only have to develop this application once. So how can we do this way? the Angular component itself, as I said in the beginning, is something like the main moving part of every main application in Angular, and we can use the same way as the other way around. So we have to create this kind of environment to place this component, and this component is then now easier installed because the UI5 component container, that is actually in our way a whole app. I mean, this is like the idea of the UI5 component. It's a whole app, and it has an own life cycle, and it makes it very easy for us now for bootstrapping, destroying, and launching the whole application. So once somebody clicks on it, we can directly trigger the right event on this UI5 component in the container, and it will take care of it. So this is really a big plus for this kind of integration, and it was quite handy. So we developed kind of bridge component in Angular that is now, let's say, kind of, universal in this way. So it only opens a target component container that could be actually anything, and it will and should render it in some div that is provided by Angular. Angular will, in the shell, take care where to put it. So this is part of the layouting in the other shell part. So now we have this integration of Angular and need to start it in some way. We have the core, and this looks very similar to this what is usually happening in the index HTML if you're working in a freestyle application of UI5. So this is the component container, and we place it in this native element, and this native element was given by the Angular component to be filled up with some magic. So here we go, and this is the last part, of course. This was the communication part. How can we now make this interactive? The same as before, we have the event bus, and the event bus can be used to be linked to this so-called event bus from Angular. Angular calls it it's more an event stream that you are subscribing to, and this kind of Launchpad subscription is now something that you have to keep in mind, needs to be application specific. So if we want something like an event that's, let's say there's a name on this application, and in the inner application of UI5, and I want to click on it, and it shall chat with somebody else, so a chat window should open. It will not do it just by raising an event. The event has to have a meaning in the shell, of course. So there is some kind and some need of interface that needs to be negotiated just before. So those components are actually aware of each other. This is the same problem that you have in iframes. In iframes, you could use the post message API, but at cost of styling, and iframes are a bit strange in handling with this post message API, and also some filtering of data could be done with iframes that you don't want. So we want to deliver an app, a single app, but we want at deploy time to bring them all together. And so we know actually different teams in our company can work at different apps, but they have to negotiate on this kind of events. This event should be then described here either as an event bus event, or maybe as a payload in a single event. But this is up to the developer, of course. So, and it looked, of course, not very beautiful in the first place. So this was just a proof of concept, and the proof of concept will be also some later time on GitHub. But it works, of course. It works to some extent, because now we have some kind of application and another application, both developed in their same way, and I mean, on their own. And we have an issue with the routing. because the roots are actually somehow using the same idea, and it's a single browser and a single window. We have this nice little hash tag, and this hash is usually a marker. I mean, we can somehow influence it so that we don't use it at all, because Angular and I guess maybe also UI5 could be configured to not use it, and you can say the Apache or whatever that is in front of it to rewrite it. But let's say we have it, and we have now two of them. So where to go? We cannot say route 1 goes to this direction, route 2 to this direction. Somebody has to get knowledge of this. So our problem is we have invalid hashes. So the hashes could be for something that is not intended as target. And we could also have conflicting conflicting hashes. So one hash could go on the wrong end. So this is a problem. And our solution to this routing problem is that we now combine them together and allow them to be together. And we adapted a bit the router for this from UI5. It's called now, it's a prefixed router, and it's just overwriting the parse method, and we are searching for this kind of hash, the second hash actually, and ignoring the part that is not for this for the first one, and so routing everything to the second part. This works fine, and if you want to know how it works in detail, there's a link. My colleague actually wrote it all down, and it's, I guess, easier to follow there than to explain what happened here. But overall, this kind of route thing is solved in this way. And we had also no conflicts, and it worked. It worked at the end, and it was a great improvement instead of using this iframes, that we now have really an integrated application. As you can see, this is now in German. So there's called online exams, and this online exams is typical as a master detail application, and it's only this kind of application. So we have several applications, one for online exams, one for, I don't know, this kind of link administration and user administration, and they all work independently, and you could start them outside, and you could also, and we use them also outside in a special employee application. And there it is actually an UI5 shell that we are using, and for this kind of lecturer, he has now a kind of new combined application that is using this frame, so this shell that is also used by the student, and the inside part that is used by the employee. So it's a kind of easy way to combine both to a new kind of application for us, and we save a lot of money because we don't have to develop this thing in Angular and this outer thing in UI5. So a big win for us, and it worked perfectly. If you click there, it will happen that this chat will open, and if you click in the outer shell component, it will start the application, and the application will behave usually as you want it. And if you have deep links, they will also work, so that we can use both applications with minimal effort to create something new. So to sum it up, we have kind of used this kind of Launchpad shell to combine this kind of multi-framework approach. Maybe it's something that you could use also for legacy applications, but you might be in need to adapt the code a bit, because you cannot really just use them in a way that you just make any interaction without adapting the events. So, but it's working with events, and the easiest way would probably use hyperlinks. was our experience, this hyperlinks using get parameters and so on, because they can easily transfer and they are not lost in any way. The state must be somehow preserved. This is a big difference to integration that was done years before, I guess, 2010, where you just opened a link, jumped to another application, and maybe some part was shared in the get parameters of an URL. But this is now possible to do it in a much smarter way. To make it seamless in a visual integration, you need to use similar style sheets. We were very surprised that our client actually described for years something like the Fiori style number 3. So he was all in gray from the beginning. I mean, it was really like, have a look back here. This kind of gray and all this green is now a bit green, but overall it matched totally the colors of this inside. If we make this here with the theme designer a little bit more green, it will even match in this way of to this, in this way. And as I mentioned, this kind of application is used by somebody who is, well, not a paying customer. So the paying customer gets the outer shell with his special parts of the application. And this kind of mixed up application is something that is consumed by an lecturer. So that is somebody who is in service for the actual client. And this is important because it's also related to the performance, of course. I will not get too much in detail with the performance, but maybe they are raising questions for this. It's not perfect for sure, but it's cost effective. So this is also the idea that we had here. So it's a single purpose app as in UI5 that you can reuse in Angular. And this makes it easy for us to develop those apps because they are not in a big monolith. The old version had it this way. It was all mixed up, 3 roles, 3 applications, all in one. And we delivered this kind of application also to the student because it was one single page application. This is not part anymore of it. So it's a small version for the student and a small version for the employee and something big for the lecturer now. So we can really easily use these components, and Angular is really good for this tailored kind of shell, and easier is, of course, using UI5 with these controls. But they are not satisfying for some people in the outer world because they don't want it this way. They want something that is unique. We also found out that it's quite easy if you don't have jQuery and all these kind of applications to put them together, because jQuery would really make it horrible with different versions in the past to combine in any way. And it's much easier now with the W3C standards in comparison to, I don't know, portlet specifications of Liferay and so on. That's really, well, it has a reason why it was not developed anymore and not used really. So what's the outlook of everything we joined here? So the outlook is that web components are an interesting part that could be combined with this idea. So if we have shared widgets that would be used across apps, even in Angular and so on, it would be really interesting to use this as shared widgets. We would not use now, I don't know, them for probably whole apps, or maybe, and I mean, yeah, my colleague was actually starting to investigate this solution. How about in web component that is, like an Angular wrapper, now that we have it, and is now consuming a whole UI5 application and could be reused as a web component also in React apps. So you would be able to just put it in and maybe show the URL to this app and define some events, and you're ready to go. And all this bootstrapping that we did now would be wrapped up in a web component. This is interesting. We have to see if this makes any sense, or if this is just putting more and more on the boilerplate of everything, and this now heats up to, I don't know, bad performance maybe. we're not sure about this, but web components are for sure a good idea for this shared components. This microservice front end or micro front end application, how it's called sometimes, this architecture style is really interesting. I mean, these Fiori apps really make it you must make it a must to do it this way, because creating big monolithic apps with UI5 is quite interesting, because as I said in the beginning, they are usually JavaScript beginners in our experience that's starting, and they are not so convinced and learning deeply the concepts of reusing and so on, and splitting things up. So they are getting too huge and too complex. And if you keep the whole focus on this kind of application to one single purpose, it's much easier for everybody to control it. So it's easier for us to debug it. It's easier for us to deploy it. It's also easier for us to plan it and reuse it in a way that it's not really affected and not really touched. Makes it really, really easy. So that's brings me to the last part, that is actually the web itself. We think the web will continue to develop in a way that it's more semantic, not styled, not unless like in the past where some PHP rendered application from 2000s. I mean, it was a time when the USB drives, thumb drives came up, and PlayStation 2 and so on. At that time, it was really, there was no other possibility. And we now have something like APIs that are everywhere. We can combine those applications just on the single backend. Actually, the whole application that I described here is using an application backend in Java that was keeping the same over the years. They have different clients, but and the clients were changed, and it was much more cost effective to only replace those clients instead of creating a whole new application. And all the process and all the application parts that are the actually business case and the use cases are hidden in this backend, and it works fine. I mean, and we also saw this with SAP solutions. If you combine those in a way that you can easily go on and find something like is written in ABAP and nobody cares, and because you can put something on it. And that was a smart move by SAP to go on something like this kind of standards, and the standards like JavaScript and W3C make it really now shine, because you can reuse it, and we can easily convince clients to invest even in, I don't know, SAP technology, although it might not be the first choice, but it is on the price tag for us, and later on move to something else, because there's no really lock-in in the costs and so on due to this kind of architecture. So the question from the beginning is now, for me, do these opposites attract? I would say yes, they do, and I'm really interested in seeing more of this kind of merging those things together. The keynote mentioned it actually in a way to combining these innovations. And I mean, UI5 is on its way, and it needs time to because it needs to support so many legacy parts, I guess. And Angular was so radically destroying everything with AngularJS in the past and started something completely new. This will not happen with UI5 in this way, but maybe it's a good chance for everybody to now combine those things, learn from this kind of technology from each other, and find something that is now getting more mature. And this is actually what I also see on the whole platform. I mean, it's getting mature. Yeah. So thanks for listening, and now I would have some questions.
Thank you, Oliver. Yes, the timekeeping today is amazing. So we have time for questions. And the first question in the chat is, what is the performance impact compared to standard UI5 applications? Does it get faster or slower?
It's not getting faster and it's not getting slower. So the performance impact compared to standard UI5 is actually that we would see only a small loading interval in the beginning, and due to caching, it would not be happen on the second time. So it's really in the beginning you see something like loading up, and that's it. There's no impact really, because Angular is quite effective in keeping all things out that they don't need, and UI5 is UI5. I mean, you can make it fast and slow. It's not having really an impact there.
Good. And the other question is about the effort. How much effort is required to maintain an application like this?
It's quite easy because the kind of UI5 applications are maintained in their own way, in their part of application. And the shell that was maintained as for the students. So both parts were actually outside maintained. And this, to put them together, is actually not that much code. It's really a reuse, and Angular is from ground up to designed to reuse stuff, and to some extent these UI5 applications do the same. I mean, there's not so much more stuff happening there. I mean, it's a question about how could you transform more these applications. They're not transformed, they're the same. Yep.
And is it possible to use web components as reusable bridge components for UI5 components? If yes, what are the benefits of this?
The good part of this would be to use a web component wrapper, as I explained shortly, would be that you had an isolated DOM, a shadow DOM that you could directly write to, and the browser would keep it in sync with the real DOM. So it would be good for performance to some extent, and this styling would be also more isolated for sure. And there would be finally something like an official standards that would be in between these applications, and this kind of standard makes it reusable across any framework. So it would happen that you would have an web component, let's say it's called micro UI5 app, and you could point it to an URL of your UI5 app, and this should be something like a component that is really single purpose maybe, and define also the events, and then you could place it in a React app or Vue app and place it there like a tag, and this tag should then be styled from this hosting component in some way. So this Vue app would draw it in a way somewhere, and yeah, but you have to keep in mind that this kind of application would then be quite thin. I mean, it has no content. The content comes from these apps, and that makes it interesting because it will totally replace this kind of portals that we saw as monolith in the past. And this was quite a big effort to somehow control these things. So would be interesting. My colleague is really interested in currently investigating it. So keep track and maybe on our tech diary, there will be some follow-up. Yep.
Okay, and another question came in, why Angular JS in UI5? Why not React JS?
Yeah. So this, I had this on the last Java, on the JS conf, the same. So why Angular, why not React? And I mean, Angular is, and I don't want my colleagues now to to hate me finally. So Angular is really something that is, I think, well, that's my personal opinion, Angular is more close to Java than React is to Java. So, and since we are coming from a Java perspective, and Angular is introducing TypeScript, this strongly typed stuff, and very, very long history of frameworks that are really giving you an easy way through things. Everything is at its place, like in Java. It's very verbose, and React is the opposite. It's like, I mean, you have React, and what is React? React is a library, and you combine a lot of libraries together, and then you have a React app. Angular is something like in Java Enterprise Edition framework container that is giving you the idea of this is how you put a service. This is RxJS, the observable pattern. You have to learn it. This is how it works. Nothing else. This is a component. This is whatever. This is all defined in Angular, and this makes it easier for us to match. That's why Angular and not React. But we also use React, and yeah, I guess we will also use at some time React with UI5, and we have just to find somebody who is doing it. I will not do it.
I guess that's a topic for a Stammtisch as well to discuss over it. So one very quick last question. Do you have the code on GitHub?
We'll be soon there, I guess tomorrow or so, if my colleague is fast enough to put it there. We have it currently only inside our own GitHub instance. So that's, yeah, will be soon.
But
or
yeah,
just follow the, yep, just follow the tech diary. We will put it there, the link.
Okay. So thanks very much for your presentation.